This is my story. I never imagined my life would take such a turn. Growing up in a small village in the Transkei, my dreams were big, almost too big for the place that raised me. Our village was beautiful, with rolling hills and a river that sparkled under the sun. But opportunities were scarce. Education was the only way out, and I knew it from a young age. My parents worked hard to send me to school, and when I passed my matric, they were proud beyond words. There was no money for university, but a distant aunt in Johannesburg offered me a place to stay while I figured things out. Joburg, the city of gold. I was excited, nervous and hopeful all at once. I was going to make something of myself, no matter what it took. Johannesburg was overwhelming at first. Tall buildings, the noise, the pace of life. It was nothing like home. But I adapted quickly. It meant to find my footing. I enrolled in a college with the little savings I had and started taking classes in business management. It wasn't easy. The city was expensive and my aunt's place wasn't as welcoming as I had hoped. I started looking for a job, anything that would help me survive and pay for my education. But jobs were hard to come by. Most places wanted experience and I had none. My hope began to fade away. And I found myself spending more time worrying about money than studying. It was during one of those desperate days that I met him. I was at a mall, trying to stretch what little I had left for groceries, when a well-dressed man approached me. He was older, maybe in his 50s, with a commanding presence. He complimented my dress, said it brought out my beauty, and introduced himself as let's call him Mr. Khumalo. I was flattered, but I was wary at the same time. In the village, men like him were not to be trusted. But he was persistent. He offered to buy me coffee. And against my better judgment, I agreed. We sat in a cafe, and he talked about his successful business, his connections, and how he could help me. He said he could see potential in me, that I deserved more than struggling in this big, unforgiving city. He gave me his card and told me to call him if I ever needed anything. As I walked away, his words echoed in my mind. Was this my way out? Could he really help me? A week later, after another failed interview job, I called Mr. Khumalo. He invited me to dinner, and I found myself in one of the fanciest restaurants I had ever seen. He treated me like a queen, and for the first time since coming to Joburg, I felt special. He didn't ask for anything in return, just my company. It was so easy to fall into the trap, Soon, Mr. Khumalo was taking care of everything, my tuition, my rent, my clothes. He even got me a car. I moved out of my aunt's place and into a luxurious apartment. It felt like a dream come true. He was kind, he was generous, and always there when I needed him. But there was a darkness in him that I didn't notice at first. Mr. Khumalo's life wasn't as perfect as it seemed. He had rules, strange ones. I wasn't allowed to ask questions about his business, and there were nights when he would disappear for days without a word. When he came back, he was different, cold, distant, and sometimes even cruel. I tried to ignore the red flags. After all, he was giving me everything I needed. But then things started to get strange. He would take me to parties in hidden places, far from the city, where the people were different. They were rich, powerful, but there was something off about them. They talked in hushed tones, and there was always a sense of unease in the air. One night, Mr. Khumalo took me to a secluded mansion on the outskirts of Joburg. The party was grand, but the atmosphere was tense. I felt like an outsider, like I didn't belong. The night wore on. the guests became more secretive, and I saw Mr. Khumalo talking with a group of men in dark robes. They were whispering, their faces very serious. When I asked him about it later, he brushed it off, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. My curiosity got the better of me, and I started snooping around. I needed to know who Mr. Khumalo really was and what he was involved in. One day when he was away, I searched his apartment. I found a hidden room behind a bookshelf. Inside were strange artifacts, candles, symbols, and books in languages I didn't even understand. It was like a scene from a horror movie. In one of the drawers, I found a journal. It belonged to Mr. Khumalo, and as I read through it, my heart sank. He was part of a cult, a secret society that practiced dark rituals. They believed in harnessing power through sacrifice, human sacrifice. The parties, the gatherings, they were all a cover for the sinister activities. Felt sick. The man I trusted, who had given me everything, was a monster. He had to leave, but I was trapped. He had control over every aspect of my life. I didn't have my own money, my own place, nothing. I was just a pawn in his twisted game. I knew I had to get out before it was too late. I started planning my escape, but it wasn't easy. Mr. Khumalo was always watching, always checking in on me. He pretended everything was fine, that I was still the naive village girl he met at the mall. But inside I was terrified. Every time he took me to another party, I feared it would be my last. I kept the journal hidden, knowing it was my only evidence if I ever got out. One night I overheard a conversation that chilled me to the bone. They were planning a ritual. I was to be a sacrifice. My blood ran cold. I couldn't wait any longer. I had to leave that night. I packed a small bag and took the journal. I left the apartment quietly, praying he wouldn't notice until it was too late. I got into my car and I drove, not knowing where I was going, just wanting to be as far away from Joburg as possible. I didn't stop until I was back in the village. I had nothing but the clothes on my back and the journal, and I was alive. My parents were shocked to see me, but they welcomed me with open arms. I told them everything, and they urged me to go to the police. The police was skeptical at first, but the journal convinced them. An investigation was launched and Mr. Khumalo was arrested. The cult was exposed and the members were brought to justice. It was a long, painful process, but in the end, the truth came out. I stayed in the village after that, far away from the city and its temptations. I learned a hard lesson, one that cost me my innocence. One that cost me my innocence, but not my life. I went back to school, determined to make something of myself. But this time, I did it on my terms. I never forgot what happened in Joburg, but I didn't let it define me. I was stronger now, wiser. The city had shown me its darkest side, but it had also taught me the value of home, of family, and of staying true to myself. Now, when I sit by the river, watching the sun set over the hills, I think about the choices I made. I could have ended up like so many others, lost in the city, a victim of its shadows. But I was lucky. I got out. I share my story with the girls in the village, warning them of the dangers that lurk in the bright lights of the city. I tell them to be careful, to trust their instincts, and to never ever trade their souls for temporal comforts, because in the end, nothing is worth losing yourself over.